Ferrari on day 2 of the preseason test in Bahrain have finally stopped hiding the underlying pace of their SF-24 at last and began to showcase the massive jump over the winter break they've made. With the team, to my reckoning, firmly the second quickest team now behind that of Red Bull. This is thanks to them having finally solved their tyre degradation issues that have plagued them throughout the last 2 seasons of this ground effect era. Not only did they set the fastest time on day 2, which was within a couple of tenths of Max Verstappen's pole time last season, albeit on softer tyres, most impressively was their race simulation that the team and Carlos Sainz carried out in the afternoon session. And let me tell you, it was mightily impressive. So, at last it seems all the talk and hype throughout the winter break for once has finally come to fruition at last. All the changes which we've seen on the SF-24 have helped them improve by a massive margin on last year's challenger, the SF-23. I have a video on the channel which breaks down all of these changes. If interested, the card to watch this is in the top right corner on the screen now. One of the SF-23's Achilles heels from last season was the constant eating up of the rear tyres in race situations. This was something they have worked extremely hard on over the winter to rectify for this season. Ferrari have never had a problem of being fast over 1 lap in quali. I mean, they have Leclerc in the car for God's sake after all, but come race day, when expectations increase and they are looking to convert their pole to a win, they've never managed to do that apart from in Singapore, with the nature of that particular track, where overtaking is extremely difficult, playing a major role in allowing Carlos Sainz to take the only non-Red Bull win last season. So, for this season, they've paid extra attention in trying to preserve their tyres over race distance, which is something that was quite obviously needed. And it seems to have paid off if Sainz's race simulation in the afternoon on day 2 is anything to go by. In the SF-24, Sainz lapped the Bahrain circuit with incredible consistency across all stints in his race simulation. As you can see from the graphs on screen now, this is the breakdown of that very race sim. To quickly put it into perspective, Sainz was a whopping 0.6 of a second quicker per lap than Verstappen managed in last year's actual Bahrain Grand Prix. And this was done, mind you, with a detuned engine to top it all off. So there is definitely some added variables to put into this race sim, with them no doubt having time still in their pocket when it comes to the actual race day with their engine. Now, how does this stint measure up with that of the best race pace from last year's SF-23, you might ask? Well, let's take a look at that as well. The gains are even bigger when you compare this year's Ferrari with last year's, with the SF-24 lapping a staggering 1.5 seconds a lap, quicker than that of the SF-23. This was evident throughout every stint, but his final stint, run on the hard tyre, was extremely impressive, where lap after lap during the stint, he was able to go quicker than the previous, showing the tyre air didn't even offset the decreasing fuel load. This is quite clearly a big step made over the winter and has left them firmly as the challengers behind Red Bull. And this is an observation that many a team have come to over the first 2 days. But just how have they managed to make this huge leap from one season to the next? Well, there are a number of reasons behind this that will no doubt help to account for such a gain. The Ferrari SF-24 bears a much more striking resemblance to that of last year's dominant RB19, having had the winter to design a completely new chassis around the downwashed side pod concept that the Red Bull outfit employs. Gone is the protruding lower side impact structure that was evident across both of the side pod designs Ferrari utilised last year, with it now firmly housed lower down within the SF-24's floor structure. This frees up a considerable amount of space, which they've used to good effect. The side pods for 2024 now have a steep undercut thanks to the lowering of the cis fairing to help manage the undercut flow and side flow towards the rear of the car. Ferrari have also introduced the lower underbite lip that Red Bull used on their RB19. Again, all these changes are aimed at helping to guide the airflow into the outlet as well as over the side pods towards the rear end. And speaking of guiding the airflow towards the rear end, another feature Ferrari have introduced on the SF-24 is the smallest version I've ever seen of a water slide. It's far less aggressive than that of either of McLaren and Aston Martin's, and finishes, or rather starts, a lot further back in the side pod than either of those two teams. Also take note to how aggressive the undercut is on this side pod. It's just as aggressive as the undercut on the Aston Martin, which was equally impressive. The front suspension is another area that's had a lot of attention paid to. While the team have stuck with a pushrod layout suspension, they have made changes to the geometry for 2024 with the aim of increasing the level of anti-dive produced. As you can see from the two comparison shots of the cars, the upper wishbone on the SF-24 has seen a dramatic change, with it now situated much higher up on the side of the chassis. This obviously has an aerodynamic benefit as well as helping with the anti-dive system. For last year on the SF-23, Ferrari had a lot more of the cooling and radiators housed within the side pods, and thus they had a streamlined engine cover. But this year, everything is done a complete 360. And for the SF-24, the team have now chosen to go the route of having much more centerline cooling this season. What that means is all the internals and the radiators have moved away from the side pods, allowing them to be shrink wrapped a lot more than they were on the SF-23. And instead, they're housing most of the internals now within the engine cover region of the car. And all these changes have allowed the team in generating a lot more downforce at the rear of the car. And of course, with such a drastic concept change and you go to a downwash concept, you're going to have a lot more, I would presume, airflow going towards the rear end of the car and in a much more powerful manner. And as we all know, the more downforce you have at the rear, the better your tyre management is going to be. And equally, another role that will play another part in that is all the suspension changes that have been taken on the Ferrari as well, both at the front and at the rear. And this is going to allow them to develop a lot more cleanly and strongly this season with a fully focused direction that they have to go in. Whereas last year they had to change mid-season and it really put them on the back foot. Right guys, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, leave a like down below. And I'll catch you all in another Formula 1 video.